for the 45th District in Rochester Hills, is the district, Rochester Hills, Oakland Township. And I chair the Oversight, Reform, and Ethics Committee. Yeah, the mayor of Rochester there, Jeff Cuthbertson. And so the panel that the topic we're going to talk about is obviously extremely important, but it's more than just budget and expenditures. It says cut the fat. As I understand it, and I think this is a great direction to go, it's not just we're going to talk about the $46 billion and say it's here. It's not an informative, we're just going to tell you how the money is currently being spent and what the proposal is. But as I understand it, the discussion is going to be how do you, as taxpayers, grassroots, some of your leaders in the Tea Party movement and other groups, how do you get engaged in the budget process? And so if you want to actually have an impact, right now there's a lot of discussion about where, the governor's proposal, which includes the pension tax that we know, but it also includes over $1.5 billion of cuts, which hardly gets any notice. But we have been going for the last 2 years with Obama money and laying debt on our kids and grandkids and taking that bailout money from the feds. And because November was a good year, that money stopped. We're stopping, and we're going to have to face the music. And so there's about 1.5 billion that's not going to be filled, that has been filled in the last two and a half years. And the governor's proposal is to fill that all with cuts. So that's, we talk about the tax and the shift and all that. Well, the cut is being proposed is first. So he's saying, I'm going to fill that completely with cuts. And then after that, I'm also going to raise some in taxes here and lower it here, and it's going to be a net tax cut. The shift is actually a net tax cut of $250 million as well. But I'll just start briefly and assume that there'll be more coming in. Let me just say briefly how the process works. Appropriations, about a third of the legislature, I would say, is in appropriations committees. And so the appropriation committees, and about 2/3 are in policy. And so I in policy, I don't have any appropriations. But the appropriation committee, they meet as a whole, and then they break down into subcommittees. And so there's 10, 15 different subcommittees, and there's a subcommittee on the Department of Community Health, a subcommittee in that $10 billion budget, a subcommittee on Department of Community Health, our Department of Human Services, subcommittee on higher ed. And so, there's Senator Bishop. And so these subcommittees is really where the work is happening right now. The full Appropriations Committee, as I have seen it, really relies on those subcommittees, and they all have Republican chairs. Sometimes those committees, higher ed, I think, has 3 people. And, there's a lot of criticism that because of term limits, that these are people that have a budget of $10 billion, and the bureaucrats or others just say, well, don't worry, you guys will be gone in 6 years and I'll still be here, and it's very complicated and complex. How are they going to know where $10 billion is? And so I really think there is a real need for citizens to get engaged. And, look, we've got 10 million citizens. If 1% of 10 million or 100,000 people devoted an hour a month, that would be 1.2 million hours of looking at the budget and looking at our expenditures. So, I really think that with the internet and I'm just giving my opening comments here. It's kind of stalling as well, but now that you're here. But really with the internet, I think there's a real opportunity, especially Facebook. I mean, I would hope that as, if each Tea Party took one of those departments and said, we're going to really understand the higher ed or the Department of Community Health, and really spent time, I mean, they would be a huge resource. You would literally have an impact of millions of dollars, tens of millions. I mean, that possibility is extremely real. And a Facebook page, I think every subcommittee, whether they form the Facebook page or groups do, and with the links, so that when you have insomnia at 2 in the morning, you get up and you say, well, I'm going to, might as well hit this link and start looking at past expenditures and current expenditures. So, I really think that we can take advantage of the technology out there and Facebook, but your real ability to interject right now, or in the budget, is happening right now. The subcommittee, as a matter of fact, in the House, I believe they're meeting over this 2-week break that we're starting. And, you know, this is where you can testify. I mean, you can go before them and, you know, if you've done some studying, I think that would help. But I mean, if you go into higher ed or to a department that you know a little bit about, go to the hearing. Or if you can't get to it, I really think that the chairs and the people that are on those subcommittees would welcome more eyes. I mean, that's why we need transparency. That's why, you know, you could see. And let me finish with this. I'm excited about the whole debate, or not the whole debate, the whole proposal of Governor Snyder on outcomes and measurements and metrics. And if you were in my transparency session earlier, I mentioned that, you know, Lansing and government hates being measured, and because things could go wrong, and then they're held accountable. But, you know, the governor has really just said, I don't care. I mean, as an executive, executives like to fix problems. They like to, you know, have the problems bubble up and then they fix them. And so I think he really genuinely says, I don't care if things aren't working right now. I want to find them and make them better. And so there's a real drive to say, okay, we're spending $1 million in this department, but what are we getting it for? And what are the 5 things we should be measuring? And then let's start measuring them. And where do we want? What's the outcome that we want in those 5? Do we want them to get better, to get, you know, the numbers to get lower, how quickly? And so I think those are the debates that our citizens can also engage in as he develops this idea of metrics and outcomes. You could say, okay, here's your 5. You know, he had a dashboard. He'll have dashboards for every department. And so he's going to tell you what he thinks they're measuring. And I talked to Lieutenant Governor Calley back last year when he just got elected, and he said, we're really having, you know, the challenge is going to be figuring out what we're measuring and how to measure it. But you know, as a former CFO and COO, I tell you that just start measuring stuff, and then if you're measuring the wrong stuff, that'll percolate, and you'll start figuring out where to measure the right stuff, and it's a progression that the citizens can help. They will have a metrics scorecard for every department, and you should be able to see it and say, those seem like good metrics for this $100 million, or not. And you know, we need to be able to drill down into those, and so that we don't have a bunch of fluff, which I don't think the governor will even have an interest in. But I don't want to see things get better every time for every department, for every metric. I mean, that's, you know, we got to be able to look into and have transparency to see how they're measuring those. But I think it's an exciting time, and quite frankly, I think Michigan is going to be on the forefront of this idea of measuring outcomes and how the money is being spent, and to have that debate with our citizens about whether that's the right area, whether that's the right direction, whether we're progressing fast enough in the allocation of resources. So now is the time to get involved. The subcommittees are meeting. We have committed to get our side on the House done by June 1st. Usually we go to September 30th, but we're committing. And I know Mike would have been able to do it a lot earlier, but the House didn't do anything until like 2 weeks before September 30th, last session. But it is going to happen pretty rapidly. I know that that's the goal. I think the Senate has said that it'll be a lot faster. And so decisions are going to be starting to be made this year. And, you know, I think that there's areas to cut. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Robertson.
If it's advice that I could offer, let me say this: is that I think that I know it sounds, well, let me begin by saying I know it sounds corny, but writing your legislator or sending an email does in fact work. Believe me, it does. Anyone who doesn't listen to what folks are writing them or contacting them about it won't be there very long. If the question is how do you effectively put input into the budget process, what I would say is, as Tea Party organizations, first of all, make an assessment of the talents and abilities that you have among your group. You all have expertise in your own work, in your own life, in your own livelihoods. Some of you may be attorneys, some of you may be accountants, people in business yourselves that are used to dealing with systems and organizations and that. Do an assessment of the talents that you have available, and then perhaps working with other Tea Party groups across the state, maybe parcel up the work and say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to assign people to come to these appropriation committee meetings. Perhaps with all the different Tea Party groups that there are, at least those that are in reasonable proximity to Lansing, and you can divide up the work of monitoring and paying attention to what goes on in the committees and observing and offering a counterpoint to the folks that are there and testifying all the time. The thing about Lansing is it's a government town. It's a spending town. The folks that want to spend money and are pushing the legislature always to find more tax revenue and tax increases and spending increases, this is all they do all day, every day. And so as citizens who are busy working and living your lives in the real world of the private sector, I would say, first of all, I empathize with the fact that you have a limited amount of time, but perhaps like no other time in our history, the communication of the internet and Facebook and so on gives you the ability to communicate amongst yourselves in a way that you can take your advocacy and your involvement to the next level by involving yourselves and basically dividing up the work and then starting to monitor as citizens the appropriations committees and their activities. And then bringing real life examples of what you observe to the testimony, because from that comes questions which then become changes in policy. I can relate a situation from my own experience. I had some landlords in my office a week or so ago, folks that are doing business in my area, who had a complaint about the way in which our Department of Human Services doles out money through bridge cards. I ended up taking that real-life experience, that real-life circumstance of that constituent to the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate that deals with the Department of Human Services. He took it down, and I'm certain, knowing Bruce the way I do, that he's going to turn what I told him into a method of interrogation that's going to reveal facts to him that wouldn't otherwise be known. And so if you bring the things that if you observe and you bring those issues forward, I think it helps us in the job that we have to do.
Okay, we'll hear from Senator Bishop. I also, this is as I perceive the direction of this breakout session is that the folks attending have a level of interest that's more than just superficial, that you may actually either want to be engaged or thinking about actually being engaged and wanting to know how you would in the budget process. I mean, it's overwhelming. I mean, $46 billion, a large portion of that comes from the federal. So if you cut that money, you would just send it back to the feds. You wouldn't save Michigan taxpayers any money, but still, that should probably be done if there's inefficiencies. I think legislators can also, be overwhelmed as well. And we could really, if we could put systems in place, and if any of you think about in ways and systems, we really could use your help, your eyes, whether it's a little amount of time or a lot of time. But Mike, why don't you, for folks who want to get engaged in the budget process, and there's probably nobody who has more experience, at least overseeing that. You weren't the appropriations chair. They answered to you, and thankfully you were there for the 8 years, but particularly the last 4 years, to keep the spending down. But how are some ways that maybe citizens who want to actually find some fat or more than just kind of an email that says, I think taxes are too high, and cut. But they actually want to start engaging a little bit. Are there opportunities, or maybe with Facebook or with some of the technologies? How can a citizen come to an appropriations committee and testify and tell them what they think?
Sure. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. It's my pleasure to be here and be a part of this group. I am out of office now, but I'm with you in spirit, and I'll tell you right now, I am going to stay involved, and I'm going to be right there with you through this process, because I started a job, and I've been trained and brought up to continue to fight. So please know I'll be with you along the way. I want to let you know that your influence is very important, and whatever you're doing, it's working. This last election was epic. It was the most meaningful outcome in probably the history of our state in terms of elections. You have a supermajority in the Senate. And the reason why you have a supermajority in the Senate is because the folks in this room